Hey guys, this is Jason with Nerd News, being brought to you this week by Cloud9 Comics. Cloud9 Comics, look, if you're like me, you've definitely got too many comics. Not saying that's a bad thing, but maybe you got a bunch of stuff that you really aren't even paying attention to or really haven't read in a long time, and maybe you've got it in a collection, a hardcover, or a trade. Hey, check out Paul over at Cloud9 Comics. He's the guy to sell that extra stuff to. If you're looking to get a hold of him, the phone number is 314-691-2864, or you can always email him at cloud9comicsandmore@gmail.com. So this week, Spider-Man 2 has graced the shelves. Next weekend is literally Comic Con, and they've made some interesting announcements about some things that are coming. Marvel Generations legacy numbering has been, causing some people to scratch their heads. Plus, we really, really, really want to like Matt Reeves.
Thank you for tuning in to Entertain the Geeky, your source for nerd news.
Hey guys, this is Jason coming at you with Nerd News for the week. I'd like to start off really quickly by saying one thing that we touched on last week. Matt Reeves, the man who is directing, or going to be directing, the new Batman film from DCEU. He recently announced just this week that he has completely thrown out the script that they had already written, the script that Ben Affleck and some of the other guys there had written. He's starting from scratch, and he said in a week prior that he really wanted to do a story about Batman being a detective. So I'd just like to say, Matt Reeves, I really want to love you, but man, you do something good, do something right, because Wonder Woman is the only thing so far that has really gotten me excited about DC as a cinematic universe. So that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to touch on that really quickly. So Marvel Generations, we talked about on the first episode of the show. They've made all kinds of announcements since we talked about it. Most notably that most of the books are going to be returning to a legacy numbering. And if you're unfamiliar with what a legacy numbering is, that is the total number of books that have been printed with that title. So what that means is, you go through 100 issues of Incredible Hulk, say. Well, and then there's not an Incredible Hulk book for a while, and then when it comes back around months later, it starts at number 1 again. So what legacy numbering is counting every single one of those issues as if they were a numbered issue from the very get-go. And it's very cool. It kind of can give you some really interesting milestones. DC's done it in their Rebirth stuff. Action and Detective Comics are closing in on 1,000 issues, which is a pretty impressive milestone to get to. So there's definitely been some announcements about titles that are getting renumbered to a legacy numbering, and it's really been making people, kind of scratch their heads, because there's definitely been some things that are a little confusing based on some earlier times when they did something similar to this with legacy numbering, where certain things that were counted are now not being counted, or certain things that weren't counted are all of a sudden being counted. So they've got a panel coming up to talk about all of this at San Diego Comic-Con next weekend. So hopefully we'll get some of these questions answered, and at least one or two of the nerds in the audience are like me and want to know what's up with the numbering. I'd like to honestly see the cover gallery, because that's usually something they do when they get to a milestone issue is, say they got to 500. Well, the last 5 pages of the book are, a gallery of every cover that's led to that. So it gives you kind of an idea of what issues count, toward that legacy numbering. So hopefully we'll get some of this stuff cleared up at San Diego next week. Speaking of San Diego next week, we're definitely getting very excited. We've started to see some announcements of some of the panels and some of the things that are going on. Obviously the big ones, there's a Disney, Marvel Studios thing. There's a Warner Brothers DC EU thing. There's a bunch of comic things getting announced. One of the big ones that I'd like to talk about is the Netflix panel. Now we are closing in on Defenders. I mean, we are literally just under a month. I think it's beginning of August, so just under a month away from seeing Defenders and being able to understand what that means for this whole Netflix shared universe thing that they're doing. So hopefully when we get to San Diego, we get this panel, we'll see a new trailer, and maybe get some of our burning questions answered from the panel. Now we definitely, the one big thing is when they announced this panel, they announced all the people that were going to be a part of it, and it was announced it's going to be a Defenders panel. So that brings up one interesting thing. I mean, obviously everyone's there. You got Charlie Cox, you got Mike Coulter, you got Finn Jones, you got Kristen Ritter, Jeff Loeb, who is kind of the continuity guy, I guess, the guy in charge of all of this, is going to be in attendance. One name that popped up that we were really not sure about when we first saw it was John Barenthal. And if you've seen Daredevil Season 2, John Barenthal turned in a pretty excellent performance as Frank Castle. And he does have a solo series that I'm sure they'll talk about also. The difference being this was announced as a Defenders panel, and Barenthal is going to be sitting in, and he's going to have a part in the panel. So what does that mean? I mean, what are the implications there? Do we have a confirmation that John Barenthal is going to be in Defenders? Because up until this point, he's not really been used in any of the promotional material or anything like that. There's definitely a lot of things they're doing right now with images and posters with all of them in it. So there's curiosity among everybody as to what that means for Defenders. Is Barenthal going to be a part of it? Are we going to get to enjoy his take on Punisher once again before we get to his solo series? That also begs the question of his solo series. Are we going to get to talk about that? Are we going to get to see a trailer? There's been a lot of cast announcements and set photos, and there's other things like that Barenthal and some of the other actors have tweeted out. But we haven't really heard much else about it. We don't know what the plot line will entail. We really don't understand what direction they're taking Frank in. So it'll be interesting to kind of see, how this all plays out, to see if it's something that's going to be worthwhile, I guess a worthwhile successor to what he started with season 2 of Daredevil, which if you haven't seen it, man, get out and see it before you watch Defenders. It's on Netflix. It's always going to be on Netflix. It is a Netflix original program. All 4 of them are on there. There's 2 seasons of Daredevil, there's Jessica Jones, there's Luke Cage, and there is Iron Fist, which may not have been the best one they've done, but it was definitely essential to the continuity that they're building toward Defenders. Defenders itself, we've seen one trailer. We saw a very short teaser prior to that. I'm very curious what the focus of the Defenders as a television show will be. Sigourney Weaver is attached as the lead villain in the story. So there's a lot of questions. There's a couple of quick shots of her in the trailer. We see one really spectacular shot of the 4 of them fighting what appear to be ninjas or hand ninjas, most likely in a hallway. And it's definitely, interesting. I mean, I don't want to say good. I really don't know yet. The trailer was very short. But it's something that I'm excited about. It's something that I want to pay attention to, and I think they definitely are going to try to wow us in the same way that Joss Whedon did with his big ultimate team-up in Avengers. Speaking of Joss Whedon, I haven't really touched on this yet. This, from a couple of weeks ago, Joss Whedon is actually stepping in to finish Justice League. I say finish tentatively there because I'm not really sure what his actual job is at this point. I mean, there was talk that he was going to be reshooting a few key scenes. There was speculation that some of the scenes were written by him, so that could lead to a very different feel, kind of a disjointed feel to some of the moments in the movie, because Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon are very different directors. They work with their actors differently. They have different ideas about what makes things good, what makes a scene work well. I think ultimately the movie will still be Zack Snyder's film, but Joss Whedon's flavor, maybe, I don't know. I mean, they've definitely had some weird comments about what their movies have been at this point. Some say they're too just disjointed. They don't have cohesive plot lines. They've got plot holes that you could throw basketballs through. But there's been some shining moments. I think even in I'm in agreement that the movies haven't been the best movies, but there's been some moments that really feel like a DC moment. The Batman vs Superman had those those flaws. It was a little disjointed, and it definitely didn't do enough to tell its story and to fill out its plot. But there was a director's cut that was tried to fill in some of those holes. But ultimately, what I think we got out of that movie that worked really well was Batman and Superman together. Yes, there was the goofy, don't let Martha die, and you gotta save Martha, and that was just really silly, and it was just a really flimsy reason to get them on each other's side. But once they were on each other's side, I liked their back and forth, and I thought it worked well. Not to mention, I did think that Ben Affleck as Batman works. I know there was a lot of skepticism way back when they announced that choice. But it works, and I really hope that we can see some improvement on these aspects going forward, because I really, really want to enjoy the DC film universe. I don't want that to be something that I constantly am disappointed by. I've been reading Justice League and Batman comics since I was a kid. It is a good time to be a nerd. There's things, the movies that they're making are what we've been waiting our whole lives for. If you've been reading comics since childhood, we've literally been waiting our whole lives for this. So I want to like it. And obviously Warner Brothers has a panel at Comic Con coming up. And, there's definitely some speculation as to whether or not we'll get another trailer, or, we'll talk about what Joss Whedon has added to the whole thing. But I'm curious, and I really want to know that it's going to be something I'm going to enjoy. The trailer that we've seen, the big theatrical trailer that we saw last time, it looks fun. It looks like there's moments in it that could be great, but really I kind of felt like it was just a, hey, look at us punch stuff kind of trailer. And it had a little bit of plot, and obviously we're going with a doomsday thing, and not a doomsday thing, an apocalypse thing, a dark side thing. So Steppenwolf is supposed to be the villain in the film. He's going to be filmed, I guess, entirely CG is how his role is going to be taken. I don't really know how you can do that giant man without adding some CG in there, but we'll see. There's definitely aspects of it that I think could be good, but the trailer hasn't really sold me yet. So moving on, obviously there's some other announcements coming out of Comic-Con. Marvel, which, just had Spider-Man Homecoming hit theaters last weekend, and man, I gotta tell you, it was great. I did a little review of it on our Facebook page, facebook.com/entertainthegeeky. So if you want to check it out and hear what my thoughts were, you can find it there. But Marvel and Disney, they've got D23, and then they've got San Diego Comic Con International. So we should see some big announcements coming out of some of the projects that they're working on. Heck, maybe even a teaser for Avengers Infinity War. They are working on that movie right now. I don't know if they have enough of what's been shot to produce some kind of teaser trailer, but you never know. I'm honestly excited to hear more about Black Panther. I'm excited to hear more about what's coming next year with Avengers Infinity War, with Ant-Man and the Wasp. We saw Evangeline Lilly tweet out a picture of her in costume. Apparently the D23 Expo was using the image of her in her costume as a promotional thing for their Marvel section of their convention. So they've got a lot of interesting announcements to make. Obviously, we've got Thor Ragnarok coming to theaters, later this year. We're getting closer to that one as well in November, which obviously, is also the month that Justice League hits theaters. So we'll see how well that does for DC, trying to put one of their big movies up against a Thor film. And while the Thor films haven't really performed as well as other films, I think people are very excited about Thor Ragnarok, not only because it does look fun, it looks different, but also because they're going to bring us a little bit of Planet Hulk, for this ride, and we're going to get kind of a, buddy cop thing happening between Bruce Banner and Thor. Also, it's Thor without a hammer, and we're using Hela as the villain, the goddess of the underworld, or goddess of death in Asgardian lore. Very, very good character in the comic who has always, she doesn't come around unless some big, big stuff is going down. So you can imagine it's going to be a pretty amazing spectacle to see. I'd wager a guess that it will probably do the best of the Thor movies. I'm gonna mispronounce his name. Tahiki Wa something. Apologies. I am looking at the man's name and I don't want to mispronounce it, so I'm just not going to try. But he's definitely a director. I think he's a director to watch, and I think he's going to bring a very different feel to this Thor movie. I think what we'll ultimately end up with is something more akin to Guardians of the Galaxy. So, I mean, I know some people that don't necessarily enjoy the Guardians of the Galaxy movies as much as they enjoy the others, but if you're a fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor Ragnarok might be right up your alley. I mean, it definitely seems like a universe-spanning journey for Thor, who loses his hammer and gets exiled from Asgard and ends up on Sakaar, where he's captured, and they shave his head and they give him a helmet and they put him in the games. So, you know, obviously we can assume him and Hulk will escape and they will not be prisoners of the Grand Master anymore. And they will go off on their universe-spanning journey to save Asgard from Hela. So Marvel's got some interesting things that we'll probably hear more about once we get to San Diego Comic Con just next weekend. So come back here next week, and we should have Thursday, which is a part of, I think it starts on Thursday. So come back here next week, and we'll have some more stuff to talk about from the first day of San Diego. I'd like to also touch on real quick a comic book that came out just yesterday. Spider-Man 2, number 1. I know that sounds goofy and confusing, so bear with me here for a second. A while back, they did a crossover. This is before the Ultimate Marvel Universe had been destroyed during the big Secret Wars crossover. But they did a crossover with Peter Parker from the regular Marvel Universe and Miles Morales, who is the Spider-Man from the Ultimate Universe that took over after their version of Peter Parker died. And he was great. He was a fan favorite character. And after Secret Wars, he's one of the ones that survived, and he's got his own book now in the regular Marvel Universe called Spider-Man. So this is the sequel to a crossover that they did back in the day called Spider-Man. And in it, Peter gets sucked into the Ultimate Universe. He meets Miles. They fight Mysterio and several other villains that Mysterio makes them think are fighting them. It had some really good moments. It was a really fun little crossover with the kind of, you know, older Peter Parker that's been at this a long time and the younger Miles. It kind of felt like Spider-Man Homecoming, if I'm being honest. Just someone who is a mentor to someone younger. And they work together and they get things done. And ultimately they win the day. And one of the things that was left a mystery, is Miles asked Peter, in your universe, is there a version of me? And Peter said, I don't know. I'll have to check that out when I get home. So sure enough, the end of the 5th issue of the crossover, which was the last issue, Peter's getting out of the shower and he sits down and he pulls up, the computer and he types in Miles' name. And then he's just the last panel is just kind of him looking stunned. And that was it. That was the end of the story. And we never got to find out who that version of Miles was. So with Spider-Man 2, we are putting them back together. Obviously, they're in the same universe now. So we're putting them back together for a team up that's focus is, who is this other Miles? So I'm probably going to get into a little bit of spoilers about this comic. So if you don't want to hear what I have to say, press stop, go read the comic, come back, hit play, and then we'll talk about it. So there's it starts out as a very standard story. We are starting to find out in the Marvel Universe that other characters have survived the demise of the Ultimate Universe. One of those characters pops up in the first issue here, the Ultimate version of Taskmaster. And if you don't know who Taskmaster is, he's a mercenary type character. His power is that if he fights someone, he is able to perfectly mimic said person's fighting style. So what that means is if he fights Captain America and Captain America beats him, Captain America's going to have a harder time beating him next time. Because he knows Captain America's fighting style. He's got this weird photographic memory for how the people move and how they fight. So he's a very interesting character. Well, the Ultimate version of him is, for lack of a better term, just a sociopath. he's a little bit of a different character entirely, but I digress. He is the bad guy in this first issue, and Miles and Peter, they take him down, and everything's great. And obviously, you know, there's some context about what you get reading the book, that he is working for someone else. And sure enough, we have a little epilogue that takes place outside of New York, and a woman is talking to someone off panel, and she says, "Oh, I'm really sorry, Mr. Morales. I didn't know what else to do." And you know, last panel is Miles, who looks a little more on the Hispanic side, I think, than his Ultimate Universe counterpart, who is mixed. He's actually African American and Hispanic. So the regular universe version looks a little more Hispanic. He's got a lot of scars all over his face, and you know, he ends the book by saying, you know, "I never thought I'd have to do this, but I'm gonna have to go back to New York." So there's a lot of questions about where has this Miles been? Has he been a part of this universe and he's just been in the shadows, and he's been kind of a, you know, a mastermind behind other villains' plots? We really don't know. I think we're going to find out, but it's definitely something that I think will shake the Marvel universe. And not only that, but shake Miles as a character who's still very young, especially compared to Peter. So I'm interested to see where this crossover goes. Is he a bad guy? Is he a good guy? We'll find all of that out, and I'll definitely make sure to review it as we go, and we'll talk about it, and hopefully we'll get some answers in the next issue. But that's going to do it for me here from Nerd News. I'd just like to close by saying, man, everybody should just go out, read comics, watch the movies. I mean, this is a great time to be a nerd. We've definitely seen some changes in how this hobby is perceived in this day and age. So go out, check it out. Stop being left in the dust. Enjoy this with the rest of us. So come back here next week. We'll have some more stuff to talk about. Like I said, we'll talk about what's going on with Comic Con from day one, and some other things. So until then, stay geeky.